Markus, we listened to Robert Schäfer now and talked a bit about the financial industry, and I already mentioned a few of the mega trends. I know you not only, we know each other for, I think, about more than 20 years right now, that you not only know the German and European markets very well from your time at Concardis and now at N26, but you also travel a lot in the international markets. You have some committees, some seats in committees in institutions outside of Europe. So how is, in your opinion, Germany's financial industry currently doing in this international competition? Are we doing well? Wow, you have to think about it. I'm happy.
Yeah, as you know, I'm always, let's say, reflecting to that what I've seen in my previous life, which was very much, let's say, in the payment space, and where we have seen a lot of transformation, a lot of consolidation, a lot of, let's say, the intent of building European platforms. And in the banking, I think from a German perspective, I would say we are lacking behind.
All right.
And on the other side, I'm a true believer in Europe, and we had this discussion this morning also on the digital euro. At the end, I think we are all, let's say, actually we should all be forced to build European platforms. And when I look, let's say, at America or even, let's say, Africa or Asia, I mean, these are large regions where, let's say, new players have immediately a big region to address. While we in Europe say, okay, we are in the European Union at least, we could say, okay, we can also address a European Union, but if I look at the reality on the regulatory side, for example, it's still a kind of a patchwork.
That's it.
And everyone who actually wants to address that region on a pan-European basis, I think, is still, to some degree, struggling, and that's, I think, what we need to overcome.
Stephan, maybe an almost similar question to you, because you're responsible for the digital transformation in one of the biggest Landesbanks in Germany, LBBW. If you look at the whole topic of the further development of financial industry, and you see it as a 100-meter run, so where do we stand right now in this run?
Well, first of all, I think in Germany we are always very skeptical. We are always frightened about the future. We always think the
glass is never full.
Exactly, absolutely. So I think if we just talk about a 100-meter kind of run, we're certainly much more than half the way already, because we are quite fast.
Okay.
Quite fast in terms that if we change something, we change it properly. So I'm certainly not happy about our speed on a couple of things, because very often we are kind of driven by anxiety, or we are frightened about kind of new topics, especially being responsible for innovation. I always want to have it very quickly. If you talk about generative AI, I just ask myself, why aren't we there already? On the other side, and that's a topic we are talking about as well on the regulatory side, we still need the framework and the boundaries for this. So therefore, on the one hand side, within Germany, we are already quite advanced in a couple of things, because we try, at least also within LBBW, to take it proactively. But if you look into the Americas and to the Asian countries, they don't care as much as we do. And they are less frightened. And that's the reason why they probably already at 80 meters and we are just at 70. So therefore, I'm always implying that we have to be much more innovative. We should not be guided by German Angst, the typical word everybody knows about us. We should more be driven by German innovation. Because then we just try to do something. And then if somebody stops us, if the customer stops us, if the regulatory stops us, well, then we have to do it differently. But let's not stop at the beginning, because we are frightened to take the first steps.
Oliver, do you see it like Stephan? Is this German angst one of the main topics, while Germany, Europe, for example, too, always seem a little sluggish when it comes to innovation?
Probably yes. I think innovation in financial services is a wide topic, right? And I think we find good examples, bad examples. In general, I would agree we are somehow in Europe a little bit somewhere in the middle, right? Some are okay, but probably not at the top. I mean, let me turn it around. I think we have currently the interesting situation, because I'm, as representative of Boerse Stuttgart Digital, I'm really focused also on the crypto market. We are a provider of crypto infrastructure for banks and asset managers. And I think in this crypto field,
which I should mention that, sorry.
which is definitely one of the areas I think where innovation right now happens. I think especially in this crypto and digital asset field, we, in Germany and in Europe, we maneuvered ourselves somehow in some kind of pole position, right? I don't know how that happened, but it happened somehow. I think if I look at the companies all around Europe, I think there's innovation happening. We probably come later to the regulatory part. I think with the regulation, we did a couple of things right. And from that point of view, I think for once, there is an area where I think we are for now, quite far ahead, right? Also, where also America and Asia are looking towards the European market to learn. For me, the interesting thing is now, how will we continue from here, right? Because I think it's the very early days, we're very much at the beginning, and we will be able now to, this little head start we have, are we able to really build on that and win? Or are we, like very often in the past, then start falling behind, and 5 years down the road, the United States again are, front runners because they got their act together and
so you would say somewhere, somehow, we are much better than most assume.
Really in this crypto area, right? I mean,
somewhere, somehow.
in the fintech scene for 6-7 years now. I could also mention a lot of other things where I think we need to be faster and more innovative to be successful.
And you see, Oliver, that's what I meant with German Angst. We don't trust ourselves that we are actually advanced. We always say, oh, we are quite far, but no, but it's not good enough. And that's exactly the point why it's hindering really in doing some more future steps. And I totally agree, that's what we should do, but sometimes we just stop ourselves. That's an issue.
Markus, you would agree? Is that an issue if you talk with your international clients, with your international friends? When they look on Germany, is German angst a topic? Or is it more the regulation you mentioned?
German angst, I mean, German angst is obviously something what the Germans have. I mean, if you look, let's say, at most of the fintechs, for example, also in Germany, I mean, if I look at the fintech scene in Berlin, I see companies which are very international. So I could now argue they don't have the German angst because, I mean, they have people working for the company from all over the world. I mean, if I look, for example, at N26, I think there are 80 countries represented. So I would not argue that there is German angst.
Right.
I would also not say there's German angst or there's the angst for the regulation. But I think it is clearly, I think it is a mindset. Typically, Germans, as we all know, are, let's say, more organized, want to exclude every risk. And if you want to build something new, you need also entrepreneurial spirit. Yeah. And the question is, where is this coming from? And I would argue it's more coming from the companies who are building something new, where the entrepreneurs are founding a company where they pursue a vision and an idea. I mean, okay, that you sometimes also run into, let's say, problems, fine, fair enough. But I think that's more, for me, the ecosystem for innovation than traditional structures.
All right. Thomas, let me go ahead with you. Markus, in his first answer, he mentioned something. We always talk about the European market, but one of the problems, especially in supervision, is that you have to break down all the European rules, the global rules, to national markets, to national regulation. Are we sometimes a bit too precise in Germany, in Europe, for example, level playing field?
Well, a level playing field on paper is very easy, but in practice in the European Union to realize it's a bit more difficult. I mean, in banking supervision, where I can speak for, in theory we have a single rule book, but in practice we are applying rules from 19 different countries which are members of the Euro and part of the SSM, meaning banks that we are supervising. That means we're not only applying European rules, but we're also applying national rules, and by definition, they are not always the same. It means that is always one of the points we clearly see that in the so-called banking union, you have, you have a European supervisor, you have a resolution authority. When it comes to the single rule book, I wouldn't agree. I would say we have 19 or 20 different rule books, which are to a great degree harmonized, but not in every degree. And you see the differences in many cases. And then there's other things which are still missing as well. One point I wanted to mention, I would not, I mean, obviously we are looking into, let's say, the competitiveness. We don't look into the competitiveness of banks. We have other indicators that we apply when we supervise banks. And one of the elements that we're looking into is obviously also the business model, the profitability of banks. And here you can clearly see that in the last 10 years, European banks were always way behind the US banks, and within Europe, the German banks were always at the end. That's usually a very simple way of describing this. It was obviously also due to the fact that the interest rate environment was really going against the business model of many German banks, and this has changed right now. But in that regard, the profitability of German banks in the last years was always suboptimal, and that, I mean, reflects also in the possibilities for investment. For example, IT, for example, AI. This, as I said, is changing now. So the German banks really also perform better right now. And now it's other countries, for example, banks in France, which are hindered a bit by the higher interest rates because they have a different structure. But in Germany, it's now much better. If you look at the overall market size, obviously financial markets, capital markets are in Europe generally also below the level of the US. And again, here in Germany, it's again on the lower end. You would expect that Germany is the biggest capital market in Europe, but it isn't. It's more the French market right now, despite the size of the German economy. And that's certainly a point which is not going in favor of this. I would still not call it angst. I would just say Germans just have a different attitude in terms of what they do with new technology and this kind of stuff. I mean, if you make service, because the digital euro was mentioned, most people or many people or more people like in other countries would still insist on having cash for payment, for example. It's just a different thing. Whether this is angst or not, this is a different thing, but I think it's also just a different culture here.
Okay, but if we look at the role of regulation and innovation and disruption, how is the role of supervision to be understood, and what is your self-perception? Financial stability, sure, is the core of regulation and financial supervision, but to what extent does this collide with disruptive changes, with innovation?
Well, first of all, when people speak about regulation, they often look at me, but we are not a regulator. So we just
supervisor.
Apply.
You have to follow the rules.
We follow the rules.
Sure.
And if the rules don't provide us with a particular mandate, then we cannot just invent it. And that's the key point for me.
You have to deal with all the things.
We are in charge of, it's in the ECB, monetary policy. Obviously, we're not speaking about this.
In this disruption, what is the role of supervisory, of regulation in your understood? In your self-percentage.
Can you rephrase, or can you say again, please?
The role of regulation and the role of supervision in innovation. What is your thought about this? Should regulation, should supervision do more for innovation, or is that not your job?
Well, I would differentiate between regulation and supervision. Regulation, I would see a clear task also to enable industry to develop new products, not to hinder it. So this is, I think, the first point I would like to make. It's first of all a mandate that has to be given by the regulator. As a supervisor, we are looking into these topics as well, of course. So but we cannot initiate them. I mean, we see, for example, that digitalisation is playing a more and more important role in banking. So that means we are looking into this topic and see how banks adapt their business models to these new developments. But we don't. Our job is not to say, well, try this new product, but it's more retroactive. Banks are coming to us and say, we try AI in credit risk management, for example. Does this go in line with our microprudential mandate? This is our job.
Good.
But if the regulator is now setting the framework, I think that would be the better way of dealing with this.
Stephan.
But can I ask one question? Because
Oliver,
I think it's super interesting. And the question is, do you think that would work if the regulator gave this mandate to also the supervisory authorities of, not only financial stability and protecting consumers, but also supporting innovation? Because, to be honest, I think to a certain extent that's one of the issues. Because when I talk on a daily level with BaFin and so on, I hear very often the same thing, and it's true, right? Sometimes I wish and I want to have more innovative thinking from, let's say, BaFin or Bundesbank. Then on the other hand, I think, okay, how could they? Because that's not their mandate, right? And I wonder, would that be an option? Get this mandate.
New mandate. Sure.
Yeah. So we have quite a lot of mandates already, and some people complain we have already too many. Yeah. So there was a big discussion when supervision was coming into the role of the ECB in combination with monetary policy. And then there was another debate when money laundering was supposed to be Europeanized. We said right away no. I think our role is more to say, to discuss with banks or other providers on the same level. Say that we are not saying, oh, well, don't try this, please. Yeah, that's something we don't understand. Don't even try it. But be open-minded to this. I think this is more our role. But I think innovation is better created in the industry. I'm a real market economist in that sense. I think the role of a supervisor is not to block it, to encourage the new thinking in that regard, but we are not there to initiate this. But be open-minded and discuss it with banks in order to let's say, not stop any kind of new thinking. Yeah, and that's what we tried in our best ways, of course. But I mean, there are some problems coming with this. We probably speak about later. Yeah.
Stephan, a couple of weeks ago, I think I read on LinkedIn by you, "I love regulation." That's something I didn't hear very often from representatives of the financial industry. So maybe you can explain to me and to the audience and to the others here, why do you love regulation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to clarify it, absolutely, I do love my wife and my children more than regulations. Some people ask me, why do I love regulation? So maybe that's a bit higher. But
like me, yeah.
But on the second level, I'm totally convinced that a proper regulation is a competitive advantage for us as a bank.
All right.
What people don't like is uncertainty, in any kind of sense, in the private life and business life.
Now I understood.
So regulation, it doesn't matter whether we like it or whether we hate it, but it does give us a certainty. It does provide a proper playing field where we can oblige to. Okay. And that's the reason why I do love regulation, because it gives us and our customers the security, so if they deal with us as an LBBW, which is a regulated bank, where we have to provide regulated products, they can trust they get what they ask for. So if you're in a different market, and we spoke about this a couple of times today, FTX and Binance and some others, or some other players from China a couple of years back, which have not been under that particular regulation, it has always been risky. You wouldn't trust 10,000 euros to somebody in the pedestrian zone.
Okay.
You don't know, there's no regulation. So why should you do it in the financial market? So therefore, regulation for me is really a very, very strong sword. If we use it properly, then it's really a competitive advantage against many other players. Having said this, it really means that we should not always kind of be annoyed by it, saying, oh, regulation is too heavy. Sometimes, if plan A doesn't work, you have to look for plan B or plan C. But regulation, at least that's how we put it really, whether in digital assets, whether for generative AI, whether for open finance and so on, what you're going to do, it's really a competitive advantage we also want to use for our own benefit. And that's a different way of doing innovations. It's not trying to do something around, it's just trying to use it as a push.
Okay. Markus, do you love regulation too? Because your company, N26, has a lot of affection from the supervisory authorities in the last month.
I mean, you know the claim of N26, love your bank. I would now say we also love our regulators.
Maybe that's a no slogan, you can write it on the website.
Maybe Valentin can answer that question. No, I think let's be more concrete. It's also always very nice to make these general statements.
One short question again. Do you see the development of supervision at N26 as positive overall and the action of the supervisory authority as beneficial?
Yeah. I mean, obviously at N26, as everyone knows, I think the press journalists are outside, so entre nous. Clearly the dialogue with the regulator, let's say, has very much, intensified and evolved over the last 2 years. I would say clearly in a very positive direction. If I remember conversations at the beginning, you could sense that BaFin, or the regulator, let's put it neutral, I mean, obviously was maybe to some degree struggling in really understanding a pure digital retail banking model, which fine is fair enough. I mean, as if you only, let's say, regulate mainly saving banks, Landesbanken, etc., I mean, clearly something like N26 is very different. What I have experienced is that they were actually became very interested in how the specifics, how the business model works of a pure digital bank.
Okay.
I mean, on the other
side,
side,
they really try to understand what you're doing.
On the other side, I mean, BaFin obviously looks at the German market. N26 is active in many markets. So here again, I mean, we had to get engaged also with other regulators, Italy, France, Spain, for example. So that, I mean, shows for me that we still, I mean, have, I mean, a patchwork in respect of regulation. I think there's a need to find here a more common ground. Maybe someone like N26 has triggered some of maybe thinking about that. The other thing is also, if we talk about that, what a bank has to do, I think we also have to look what's happening in the, let's say, other part of the value chain. I mean, for example, if you look at fraud. I mean, in a different context, I had this morning a discussion about SEPA recall. I mean, today in Germany, we don't have transparency about, let's say, the numbers of SEPA recalls in the German market. So an individual bank doesn't really have a feeling, where do we stand?
Okay.
That is something, I think, where we should actually collaborate among banks, banking groups, and where I think we need to get more data. Because even now, the traditional banks are becoming more digital. Takes probably a bit longer than a pure digital bank. But at the end, the more you become digital, the more data you actually are dependent on, you have to work with. And that, I think, is for me a big topic. And it's not just a German topic, it's at least a European topic.
Okay. Thomas, maybe concerning this topic, is it a general problem of fintechs? They are very creative as children. They grow up into teenagers, and suddenly they are adults and not only have rights, but many of duties. What is from your point of view, the right mix of, I will call it strictness and forbearances of a supervisory authority? Keyword, Sandkastenbox, sandbox. So how do you deal with this? On the one hand, you will have a lot of innovations. We will have the creative industry in the sandbox, but sometimes they grow up and they got relative to financial stability.
Yeah. So first of all, I don't speak about N26, of course.
No, not about N26, but the question is
generally about
is this
this
typical
point
problem?
about sandboxes in banking regulation and supervision. It actually does not exist on our side. So we have essentially the principle, the same business, same risk, and then also the same rules apply. So there is not a possibility to say there's a banking license light with only half of the requirements, to put it simply. That does not exist. And this is something existing in other areas, I think, but not in banking supervision. And to be honest, I'm always very careful also in that regard. I mean, it's a thin line. We don't want to be a barrier for innovation and new players in the market, but on the other side, we have a particular mandate, and that is to protect the prudential solvency of banks and in the end also protect customers in that way. Yeah, and then you cannot just say only because they have less, just take a number now, less than 100 clients or something like that, we need to protect each and every client less. So I think in banking we don't have this. I'm always a bit careful also in that regard whether this would be really good. I don't actually agree with that. Yeah.
Okay.
There are other fields where you could think about this, and I think Frankfurt has made obviously very good experience also with fintechs. So because we spoke also before about financial markets, for example. I mean, if you look at these global financial center indices, Frankfurt actually moved up now recently, but when it comes to fintech specifically, they are even further up. So this is an area where Frankfurt or also Berlin has shown really how good they can do also in Germany.
Okay, so maybe make a cut and let's talk about some of the recent developments. Thomas, we heard a little bit about MiCA by Rupert Schäfer. Another topic is DORA. What is the actual status of DORA, and what is the actual status of MiCA from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it has been approved right now. I think the implementation becomes active in 2025. And that would also imply additional jobs for us in the end, yeah. And this is a point which is very important for us because I think I hinted at this before already. I mean, banking supervisors are not usually, or in the past, were not really the tech guys, yeah. So this is something where we also have to look into how we get qualified staff to deal with all of these requirements, how we can find people who have the ability to get into these new topics, yeah.
Okay.
And then obviously not only finding them, then hiring them and paying a price that they can also join the ECB. So that's a key point for us, that we are kind of developing resources and moving away from some topics which probably are not less important right now or lower priority, but then ramp up resources in a different area, meaning in all tech-related topics. Digitalisation, AI, that are obligations we get according to DORA and MiCA. So this is certainly a key topic for us at the moment.
Okay. Oliver, MiCA, the opportunities are still hesitantly exploited, in my opinion. Will we see a breakthrough in 2024, or will we have to wait until 2025?
I mean, we'll start seeing it, right? I mean, MiCA gets fully implemented in 2025 or fully in effect, but I think
in the real estate industry, everybody says now survive till 25.
No, I think, no, honestly, I think the coming year, 2024, will be a super interesting year, especially for the crypto and digital asset space. I mean, we discussed it before, because a couple of puzzle pieces are coming together, right? I mean, probably regulation is one of these, a very important puzzle piece, because I agree with what you said before. I think clear regulation is key for mass adoption, and is key for institutional adoption, is key for investors investing more and pouring more money into that space. So from that perspective, I think a clear regulation and also no sandboxes, because nobody invests really in a sandbox, right? I think this is super important. And now we have this puzzle piece there. That's one thing. Then the other thing is, I think more and more institutionals are based on that new regulation, are looking into the market, are implementing things, and so I believe in the next 12 to 18 months we will see a big step up sort of in institutional adoption for sure. And maybe can I also add one thing why I think that MiCA and DORA, I think they're very similar in that respect, especially from a German perspective. I quite welcome them, right? Because we already have a lot of that regulation in Germany. I mean, a lot of stuff that is regulated in MiCA is already regulated in German law. A lot of stuff that's now being regulated in DORA is already regulated in BAIT, by BaFin, and so on. So to a certain extent, this helps us to create a level playing field in Europe, and it helps us to sort of from our stronghold here in Germany, sort of to also expand more easily in the other European markets.
That's exactly the point what you say. I mean, EWBG is a German regulation. So therefore it's a national one, but if we want to really expand, if we really want to be innovative, it needs to be on a larger scale, because scalability is really important. So therefore the European approach with MiCA is really what's pushing forward. I totally agree. Probably 24 is still a kind of year of preparation. after the kind of crypto winter anyway, but it's a year of preparation because we all see the European regulation coming up. So therefore, there will be a much stronger chance next year really jumping into that particular business. But it needs preparation time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's definitely a very positive step forward.
Yes. What's your point of view? What's your look at artificial intelligence? Where do you see the chances for banks? Where do you see some risks? And how do you use it right now at LBBW?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm totally convinced generative AI is a paradigm change. It will change the way how we work, not what we do. That will stay the same, but how we do it, that will change totally. So therefore, we have to face it. We have to face how we cope with it. And therefore, the European AI Act definitely has to come into place because, again, it gives some security and some guidance how we can adopt it. Yes, of course, we can argue about the way are those three risk kind of levels, are they properly assigned? Especially when we talk as a bank, of course, about loan decisions and anything. But nevertheless, it's important that we can provide some kind of reliability on our own decision makings, on our usage. So therefore, generative AI is a super hot topic also within LBBW. We've set up already our usage of open data, like with ChatGPT. We've set up a solution for LBBW under a German Data Security Act, of course, and not that it runs on kind of American servers. But nevertheless, we see really that, A, the requirement from our own staff, but also the need from our customers. They're asking us all the time, so what are you doing with it? How can we adopt it? Is really there, so therefore we have to face it. And that's a point now when I come to German Angst or German innovation. But the regulation isn't there, but we just start. And we try to exploit this as much as possible. So at a certain point in time when we see that there's changes, then we have to change the solution. But we should not wait until everything is covered and saved. That's not how innovation and business works.
Okay, just give me a quick insight. How do the general talks are going in LBBW? I could imagine that it's not always very easy to talk about new topics like generative AI with less expectations.
Yeah. Well, what we did actually, it's a very early stage. We started in March with our own sandbox, with our innovation tech lab.
Okay.
Where we started with first models and tried to build up a ChatGPT version and playing with some large language models. But we immediately involved our data security department. We immediately involved our legal department. We immediately involved our HR department. So really all those people, all those areas who are normally skeptical about new kind of services which could affect the business model. So having them involved from the very early point in time, we really had a kind of positive development on how to do it. It doesn't mean that it's much quicker in the final solution because you still have set up the documents, the Nutzungsbedingungen, and so on and so on. That takes time. But we've got a very positive attitude. And we've collected so many potential use cases without even asking the business units. So you can really see there's a demand, there's a willingness, also willingness to change.
Okay.
And if we now can set up the kind of the framework, the governance framework to it, that will be the final push.
Oliver, one last topic. Time is running, unfortunately. Speaking of the DLT pilot regime, is that one good example of an open and constructive approach by regulators to new technologies? We have a sandbox for 3 years, I think, until 26, and it's talked about to keep it longer for 3 years more. Is that a good example in your opinion? Because it's an important technology too for the banking.
Absolutely, but this is exactly what I say. Why I'm very skeptical with regarding to sandbox or anything like this. I think it's good that we have it, and to a certain extent, I think that also will help us in Europe to sort of to be more innovative in that area. But MICA was the better example, right? And in Switzerland we have a DLT regime. It's not a pilot regime, it's a DLT regime. So to a certain extent also here, I'm not sure whether it's so super helpful to have this pilot regime for 3 years, then maybe 6 years, because it's unclear, right? It's not clear what comes afterwards. And right now, I maybe have fewer numbers, but what I heard is at least a couple of months back that not even 10, maybe around 10 applications are there in Europe, not in Germany.
So you don't want to have exceptions, you want to have clear regulation for the whole life.
Absolutely, but then these clear regulations, of course, need to embrace the new technology, especially when it comes to crypto, when it comes to DLT. I think there's a lot of stuff where we really need new rules and embracing the technology, not just old things.
And that's exactly the point. I mean, once you've set up some regulations or some rules, you also need to be able to change them quickly if you just realize it's simply not working or it's not practical. And I think that's exactly the point where, especially for innovation, for new topics, where also the regulator or supervisor isn't as fast as maybe some tech companies in the US, that we have to be faster in adoption of changes in the regulation itself.
Gentlemen, round 4, last round. Markus, Stephan, Oliver, a question to all of you three. You can decide who has to start. Concerning to the main topic, is supervision more of an enabler of an adequate future for the financial industry, or rather an obstacle? And how can the interaction between the parties involved to further improved?
Enabler, it depends. I think it's obviously a must-have, and I would clearly agree that regulation, distinguish between, to fulfill and work alongside regulation, distinguish the serious players from the non-serious players. As I would clearly say, I think there should be a much closer collaboration between supervisors, regulators, and
Good topic,
let's say the new players. I obviously believe more that maybe the new players actually challenge existing structures, and that's, I think, at the end where innovation plays in. AI, we discussed it. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg, what we are seeing right now.
Yeah.
Clearly, someone like N26 is using it in fraud and ML topics, but I think we will see much more also in the user and customer experience, and that, I think, will be very transformational. And clearly then also at the end, the interests of the customers will also need to be watched, and that's again something where I think one has to work together very much closer with the regulator than we have probably done it so far.
Stephan.
Well, regulation and rules are really an empowerment for innovation. So just think about it. If you sit in a sinking ship, you become really very innovative because you have no other chance. So therefore, for us, also thinking innovation really in terms of how to use a completely new, unsecure topic in a more or less secure environment is really a competitive advantage, and that's how we play it. We don't see it as an obstacle. We definitely see it as a very, very good opportunity and a differentiator between established banks to new players who try to enter the market.
Oliver,
please. So I think regulation definitely sets the framework in which innovation can happen or not, right? I think that's for sure in our industry. So I think the answer is not clear to me. It can be both. It can be an enabler, but it can also be a blocker. I think with MiCA and the crypto, I think we have a super good example how regulation can really push the market and can help. And so I think we should really learn from it and now build on it, right? To make sure that we, for now, take this advantage and build a competitive industry here in Europe.
Thomas, last words to you. In return for what you have just heard here from the three market participants, what are your goals for the ECB works this year, and what do you expect from the market participants?
Well, I would first of all agree on what they said. I think innovation needs and requires good regulation. The point is it has to be good, yeah? And because not all innovation is per se good. That's also a point, and that's why we need the regulation, yeah? But what we would
they love the regulation. They love the regulation.
Yeah. But what we would need is really a close interaction with the people who drive the innovation, because that's always, I cannot speak for regulators right now, but if you draft a regulation or if you apply supervision, you really depend on the technical knowledge, how it is used, what's the current state of the art, and this is something. We are remote to what's happening. We're not in the organizations, we are supervising them, and regulators are even more remote, and that's why the interaction, the close cooperation and discussion between the people driving the innovation, the people drafting the regulation and applying supervision is important for me.
Thanks a lot, gentlemen. Our time is over. Luckily, only the one on the stage here. So thank you very much for the discussion.
Thank you.
Danke Ihnen.